Welcome to the Odd Ones Out podcast. If you ever feel like you're on the outside looking in, you are not alone. Let's challenge our limiting beliefs and embrace who we truly are. Hello and welcome back to the Odd Ones Out podcast.
Hello.
He's Maz, I'm Beck, and it's great to have you join us. Now, if you haven't listened to previous episodes, Maz and I have delved into our root convictions, things that, in a way, we feel like they've kept us back from how we are in life and what drives our behaviours, because ultimately having a root conviction, so mine, as you might see from a previous episode, is not feeling good enough. Maz is the feeling of not belonging. And those as two root convictions have driven different behaviours. So in the coming episodes, we're going to be talking about, well, what are those behaviours? How do those root convictions manifest themselves? And how do we try to deal with them?
Yeah.
And I'm going to admit, I feel really nervous about this particular episode because it's all about me in a way. And it's focused on addiction. And addiction for me is actually food addiction, which there's a voice in my head which says, well, that's not really an addiction. Surely addiction is alcoholism or drug abuse or whatever. You know, what's food addiction? That just gets you fat. Come on, grow up. But it can actually be really harmful in different ways, not least because just by having something that I'm addicted to means that I'm not really facing reality and I can get caught up in a vicious cycle of stress and then I don't like how I look or I don't like, just myself in general. But we're going to explore it because I think maybe you're listening to this and either you have an addiction and that you struggle with, or you know somebody who does. And I'm hoping just by laying myself bare, in a way it helps to understand, and either something that resonates with you or can help you understand what somebody else might be going through. But why am I nervous? Because I'm embarrassed by it, quite frankly.
What, the whole thing, or just... I suppose you're not really used to talking about it. I mean, we've talked about it before a fair bit, but this is something a little different, especially when you're going into the ins and outs of it. And I mean, it's something that I've had since childhood because, like I said, it's linked to my root conviction of not feeling good enough. And it's gone all the way through to now my mid-40s. And I suppose there's an embarrassment because I feel weak that I have an addiction in the first place, that it's a silly addiction, that I've told myself it's a silly one because it's related to food and surely just don't overeat. And also I get embarrassed because there's a kind of fat shaming, body shaming thing linked to it. And I felt that at my biggest, and I feel that because I still feel big even when I'm at my smallest. Never that small for society, but it's kind of comparative for me. And so, I suppose, what do I do? Should we go back to the beginning of where it all came from and how it started? I think we could do. I think it might be interesting. I mean, I know that, as you say, for you, it started in childhood, and it was probably, I mean, you can say it with hindsight, it was a coping mechanism driven by your feeling not good enough, and it gave you some pleasure and probably gave you some alone time as well, because I think you said before you tended to eat secretively a lot of the time or on your own. But do you remember when it first started, or is it just something you've always had, that you've always lived with? Yeah,
I think two roots kind of came into driving the fact that my addiction is a food one, first of all. The first, in terms of not feeling good enough, is as the episode that I've gone into a bit of depth about, how did that come about? It explores it in greater detail. The not feeling good enough driving food addiction was more about nurturing myself, to feel better about myself. It's quite nice when you eat something sweet. We kind of all know that. There's a comfort level there. And so if I had a day where I felt I was being ignored or easily dismissed or was just feeling really lonely, and I think I'm feeling between the ages of 6 and 8 at this point when I think back, then having something to eat to feel that it feels nice, that it kind of fills up that gap, if you like, that hole inside where if I'm feeling lonely and I need to feed it. And bearing in mind, when you're about 6 years old, you don't have access to the drugs and the alcohol. You know, what's the next thing that can make you feel brighter? Well, that's food. It's going to be sugar to some degree.
Yeah.
So there's one thing there where I would be like, oh, okay, well, I know it feels nice to eat a biscuit, therefore I'm feeling a bit lonely, I'll eat a biscuit. There's that side. But I also have the side where we weren't really fed very well. And I don't mean that we were given loads of fast food. I'm kind of saying we weren't really given any food. Yeah. Sorry, Mum, if you're listening, because we all have our different, things, demons to bear. And, my parents were both incredibly busy, and Mum didn't want to eat breakfast in the morning. And if we had school dinners, then we wouldn't need to eat dinner of an evening because we'd already had that meal in the day. So there'd be no breakfast, a school lunch, and then toast in the evening. So I was also quite hungry. So that also drove the wishing to eat. But food was limited.
Yeah.
So that then got me into the scheme of stealing food because I was hungry and I was also lonely or feeling I'm not good enough, I need to nurture myself. So that started the cycle of the secret eating, as you've already mentioned. And so knowing, even if I was sitting watching television on my own, or even if we were as a family, but we weren't really talking, you kind of were still individual in your individual chairs, there wasn't much camaraderie going on. I'd be saying to myself, it's okay, because there's that thing you've stolen lying underneath your bed for you to eat when you get upstairs. Yeah,
because that's what I was wondering. So it was very much at least part of the time, a conscious thing, because I was just thinking, even at that age, I suppose eventually it kind of blends into the background. It just becomes part of your everyday, and maybe you don't feel the benefit from it. But you're saying that you were very much aware that it was something to look forward to, and the whole ritual around it, and basically having what adults would call sort of me time, I guess. So it was kind of there in the back of your mind, and you could deal with whatever was going on because you knew that was your sort of reward for putting up with it.
Yeah, and it did get bigger in a way. The reason that the way it kept being prevalent in my mind as something that was helping to some degree, fulfilling me in terms of the hunger and also the kind of loneliness and just not feeling good enough. As I got older, that stealing got worse. Still within the home, but not that makes it any better. But rather than taking a piece of fruit, which even with that, we weren't allowed to take more than one a day. So maybe I'd take an extra apple. Age 6 to 8, I was probably taking an extra piece of fruit or some biscuits from the meeting tin, because my dad was a vicar and we'd have regular meetings. And so the parishioners would be given biscuits. We wouldn't, but I'd take one or two. Actually became, as I got older, going into my mother's handbag, which I'm so embarrassed to admit. Because you feel like it's you who you are today, but at the same time it is because I am me. And so admitting that I would go in my mother's handbag and her purse would never close properly. So there were always coins right in the bottom, and I'd scrape my hand in the bottom of the handbag to pull out coins and manage to collect up, 50 pence, maybe £1. But back in the 80s, that bought you quite a lot. I mean, I remember with £1, couple of packets of crisps and a chocolate bar, if not more than that. You could buy quite a bit.
Yeah.
And that became a daily occurrence. And so it became a ritual. Oh, I wonder what money's in the bottom of her bag. Then I'd go to the shop. So I'm going here now about 10, 11 years old, when my middle sister, because I'm the youngest of 3, then moved on to high school. I then had no one to keep a check on me. So at that point, on the way home from school, I could stop in at the newsagent. I could go in, if I was really lucky and had managed to gather quite a lot of money, I could go into a fried chicken place and buy my dinner, and then go home and have the piece of toast. So I was able to become, the whole ritual was bigger and better as I got older and I got more daring.
I was going to say that the daring part, do you think there was an element, and maybe not, because the whole stealing money from your mum and then doing it when no one was watching you, do you think that whole clandestine element sort of added anything to it, that you felt you were rebelling a little bit?
Yeah, it was nurturing myself. Oh, I'm not good enough. So it was making me feel like, but it's okay. And I was being a bit belligerent, and it's like, but I've got this. So it wasn't just feeding the hunger. It was 100% feeding the not feeling good enough, because it was a bit of excitement. It was a bit of a, well, stuff them, this is for me. And that unfortunately continued. So all the way through my teens, I was putting on a stone a year. So I was 13 stone, 16 stone. I mean, you just kept going.
Yeah, for anyone who doesn't know stone, I mean,
Thank you.
don't know who's going to be listening to this, but a stone is 14 pounds.
Yes. Yeah. And in terms of kilos, God knows what's a stone. I don't know this.
6.5 or something.
6.5 kilos a year I was gaining. Yeah. So I was using and in a way abusing food, because food wasn't a fuel. It was everything. And it became embarrassing because in my mind, unlike, well, fair enough, a smoker might smell, and if they've been smoking for decades and their teeth might show it.
Yeah.
But ultimately, you don't really look at someone unless they've got a cigarette in their hand and go, oh, you're a smoker, let's judge you for having an addiction. And the same with booze. I mean, actually, I think there's a low level of dependency on alcohol, if you guys don't mind me saying this. Let's look at the UK. When I'm looking on Facebook, the amount of people that will be saying cheers and they'll have a drink ready on a Friday and everyone congratulates them for it. Or it's there's a low-level dependency, which is completely accepted, and it's fine. It makes us fun. We're more enjoyable. We're more, it's life and soul of the party. And if you get to the evening and you fancy a glass of wine or a gin and tonic, then that's completely okay. But again, you don't necessarily see it. It's, if somebody has a low-level dependency or even an addiction, unless they're fully on addicted and need to be properly looked after in rehab, you wouldn't know somebody's addicted to alcohol. But you put them alongside somebody who's addicted to food like I was, and it's glaringly obvious because of their size. You look at a big person, they're greedy, they're lazy, they're slow, there's a whole lot of judgment. And I can't speak for other people who are big. But for me, it was I'm wearing on my sleeve that I find life difficult, that I'm not happy.
Yeah, you never got to the stage, at least it seems to me you never got to the stage where some people, I suppose just maybe it's their personality, maybe it's kind of working at it, but they get to the point of accepting that they're a certain size and they can kind of own it a little bit. There are pros and cons to that, obviously, but I don't think you ever really accepted it. You always felt judged.
It wasn't, I mean, again, I can't speak for the people who were able to own it in terms of what their driving force is for them to be that size.
Yeah.
But mine, I am now greedy. I love food, and I could sit there and easily eat quite a lot of food in one go. I'm not a binge eater. I don't have other eating disorders around it, but I can eat a lot. But it was more a case where, because it was fueled in the back of my mind, it was fueled by not feeling good enough. If I was struggling at school, if I was bullied for anything, oddly, never for being fat.
I was going to ask.
Isn't that bizarre?
So you often kind of worried about being judged, but how often do you know that you are overtly judged?
I'd have, if I went, I remember going clubbing with a friend once in late teens and being in the queue and some blokes being like, oh yeah, you'll be lucky if you pull tonight. And so there'd be things, I knew it was unattractive. How many people look at someone who's large and go, oh yeah, they're really fit. And it's not many. So I knew it was unattractive. And in a way that in a way, because people would feel, I mean, it's like with men, I see you get a larger guy and all the other guys around them think it's okay to tap their belly and to call them Mr. Big and everything else. It becomes jovial, and it's kind of actually, maybe that guy's really struggling with his food, and maybe that food is helping him cope with something. And why don't you just take the piss out of it? Well done, because actually you're probably driving him or her or whatever to go and eat more to comfort themselves, and you're not helping at all. It's not funny.
Well, you're fair enough. No, you're just adding to the idea that being fat or being overweight is a bit of a kind of a subject for a bit of a laugh and a joke, and
that's
it
what I
can't be
got
taken
more
seriously.
I wasn't bullied. I was I had somebody who bullied me for wearing glasses when I was really young, and then I had somebody else who called me Carrot Top because I'm a redhead. But I had, again, at university, I think the manager of the bar once took the piss saying that the shirt I was wearing was bigger than his duvet cover, which, to be perfectly honest, now makes me laugh. But at the time I was mortified
Yeah.
because it was quite a funny quip and everybody found it funny, understandably, but I was mortified. At a point where, age 19, I wanted to be seen as attractive. I wanted to kind of just be part of the crowd. I didn't like being singled out for being big, but no, for me, it was always just a shame. I was ashamed of being big, but I couldn't. The more ashamed I felt, the more I wanted to eat. It became everything. My comfort for dealing with, finding school difficult, dealing with my dad dying a couple of weeks before I was 17. My weight rocketed because I hadn't got any other mechanism in my life, that I hadn't built a resilience as a child to deal with life beyond food. So every time something hard came in, I ate. And underlying everything was, I'm not good enough.
Yeah.
And the food and the size, weight of, and the way I looked validated the feeling of not being good enough.
Yeah.
It became a horrible, vicious circle.
Yeah, and then I suppose you, on one level, just assume that, I mean, you were saying when you were 19 you wanted to sort of feel attractive and everything.
Yeah.
Is it just that you kind of get to a point where you just think, this isn't going to happen for me, so I just have to accept this is the way I am, this is how I cope, I'm always going to be big?
Yeah, I had no idea how to do a diet. I mean, I had a very well-meaning godparent who kept talking to me about Weight Watchers.
Yeah.
And I had, I have a lot of kind of friends of the family, close friends of the family who are from the West Indian community who feel quite happy to point out where somebody's putting on weight and say, come on, you should be shrinking down, or are far more vocal about it.
Yeah.
And that just served to make me feel more uncomfortable or really resentful and go and eat. Seriously, if you've got somebody in your life who's a bit bigger, just don't talk to them about it. They bloody well know they're fat.
Yeah.
There is no need for you to say it, that you're not going to have some epiphany moment with them where they say, oh my God, you've pointed it out. I hadn't realised I better go on a diet. It's not going to happen until they're ready.
Although to be fair, see, you say that, but I wonder how difficult it must be for a lot of people who do live with someone or someone in their family, friend, whatever, who is that size, and the people around them know that something must be going on underneath and know there must be something wrong. And yes, ideally you shouldn't kind of say, you ever considered a diet? Or you don't want, that's going to backfire. But knowing you can't speak for everybody, what do you think people should do to be supportive? I mean, is there a sort of a general approach people might take? Because I bet there are lots of people who want to be more supportive, want to help say the right thing, but they might not, or they might be reticent because they're afraid.
You talk, first of all, about the thing that's superficial, that's aesthetically obvious. But actually, I do, and I'll caveat just one more time and then I'll stop doing it. I obviously can't speak for everybody, and everyone's different. And you've said that, I've said that, I'm not going to say it again. I do wonder if there is an element of just asking, what do you think you're coping with at the moment? Because as I got older, like I said, it skyrocketed after my dad, because I tried doing, I can't remember, the Slimming World or something before Dad was diagnosed with cancer. Before he was diagnosed, I actually managed to start losing weight. I was quite excited. There were some people doing A-levels at the same time who had started doing it and were losing weight, and so I started doing it. Found it super easy. You could still eat a ridiculous amount of food, so that filled a gap. But at the point where he then passed away 4 weeks after his diagnosis, all bets were off in terms of Slimming World, and there was a lot to contend with. And I think if somebody had said to me at that point, what are you coping with? How are you feeling? Maybe, I mean, it was obvious some people would know that I was grieving for my dad, but I was also at an age where my peers had no idea how to help. Who knows when you're 17 how to help a friend and a peer kind of deal with that grief. It's only as we get older we kind of become a bit more worldly wise. And the adults were very busy trying to deal with their own stuff or their own grief. But I do feel like when I go through phases now of gaining weight, it tends to be at a point of stress or feeling like I'm coping with too much and I don't know what else to do, because my first mechanism for coping is eating. Yeah. And so if I'm gaining weight now, because I've been working very hard, so through my 20s, I haven't got to 20 stone at my heaviest, age 21. And to be fair, I will also put it out there, whilst I didn't feel attractive, I was still fortunate enough to be shown I was attractive without making it obvious whilst at university and afterwards and everything else, even at my biggest. But after reaching my biggest, I think I just had a kind of click and I started to lose weight. So 20 stone was my biggest, and I've managed to kind of look at it in different ways. But there is always a time where earlier this year, your mum passed away. And that was a real struggle because I was grieving, but I also was grieving for you having to go through it and grieving for your family and the traumatic experience your dad had, where he tried to resuscitate her after a sudden heart attack. And then we had the whole organising the funeral and trying to sort out your dad moving down to be closer to us. And through all of that, to be able to do the day job, be a mother, be somebody who was supportive, help with the logistics, my only route to deal with all of those things for me was to eat. It wasn't going to be yoga and breathing exercises. And I'm not a drinker, so I didn't turn to alcohol. I'm not a smoker. I didn't turn to smoking or drugs. It was food. So in my mind now, the addiction is it helps me cope.
But I think that, if anything, is the insidious part of it, is it can almost fix you in a coping mentality for good. If you don't, I mean, obviously, most people who have been overweight will go through periods where they've lost weight, then they gain weight, and it's a yo-yo thing.
We try our hardest to look nice and to be slimmer for ourselves and our loved ones. You know?
Yeah, but the difficulty, I think, is obviously the dealing with the root conviction, the root cause, whatever it might be, and I think it seems very easy to kind of put that to one side. I mean, you talk about earlier this year, my mum passing away, and there was so much to do, and you did a hell of a lot. Actually, you were a great support. But I think maybe having food there might sometimes be, I don't know, it might prevent you from thinking, actually, I need to slow down here. I need to reach out and ask for more help, or I need to not multitask so much.
Yeah.
I guess. Well, I know from kind of living with you that if you know that food or that coping mechanism is at the end of the tunnel, you will go hell for leather and do a million things all at once, knowing that that's there as a sort of a. As I said before, a reward at the end of it, or to kind of fill that hole, but knowing that that's there and having that be available, I think for you anyway, has sometimes meant that you haven't seen fit to deal with the day-to-day problem, which is I'm taking on board too much. Yeah. I'm trying too hard. I need to slow down. Because there's no incentive to sort of change that behaviour.
Until I look in the mirror and go, shit, I'm 2 stone heavier.
Yeah.
That's the point where I say I can't do this anymore, and that's not good enough. And I wonder if that's similar to, but let's replace food with anything that helps people cope. So is it a case when there's someone who realizes they've gone down 2 bottles of wine of an evening, and that's the point where they say, do you know what, actually I can't deal with this level. But you're right, it's identifying that problem early enough. Yeah. And also the way I talk to myself, not necessarily saying I'm not good enough, I need to eat per se. But there are times when I feel I'm able to manage it a bit better, and I'm able to say to myself, I deserve not to be a dustbin.
Yeah.
So for example, if our children have finished their dinner and they've got leftovers, it can go in the bin, Beck. You don't deserve to be the dustbin. You don't need to eat it. Even if in your mind that's wasteful food. Another thing I was brought up with, don't waste food. Waste of food, waste of money, whatever it might be. All of these different excuses or driving factors to eat that food are not as important as me deserving not to be a dustbin.
Yeah.
But there are other days when that voice tries to say, you deserve, I deserve the food. And then the food gets eaten regardless. Because the I deserve comes from the childhood thing of, I'm not good enough. So you try to counteract it. No, I do deserve this. And it's that pat on the back reward, or just, I mean, we all use food as a comfort, as a treat, as a I deserve, or alcohol or whatever. There is something in our lives that what's yours? I was just thinking, hang on a second, I'm talking to someone what is yours as an external thing that you treat yourself with or use as a coping mechanism? Or do you just go down it's the negative twist and that's what drives anxiety?
I suppose there's that, but there are other things. I mean, I know it's a completely different thing, but I will still maybe I'm fortunate that I still find some. I can find pleasure in certain things even when I'm feeling really crappy. So listening to music is a big thing for me. It actually,
I can't do that.
It's not a direct replacement, and it's not maybe as immediate as eating food or drinking whatever. But I've always been able to listen to music and that kind of take some of the edge off how I'm feeling. And I can kind of lose myself in it. There have been times when I'm listening to music and I've gone from feeling really despairing to kind of singing along and dancing around the room. And I'm lucky. That's what it does to me.
Distraction technique. Sometimes it does help me get past the hunger, which isn't necessarily real. It's the psychosomatic hunger or whatever.
Yeah.
But sometimes it's just a delay tactic.
I think maybe as well, I have my issues, as I'm sure we'll go into in the next podcast. But I don't think I have a particularly addictive personality either, because there are many times when I've sort of wondered why I haven't turned to food or drink or whatever, because it would have made perfect sense to. But I think I just don't, and maybe that's part of it. Maybe I just don't have that bit of my brain that's prone to addictive behaviour. I don't know.
See, no, you talking about the addictive behaviour. I remember telling someone once, only like 4 or 5 years ago, we were talking about things, what did we do when we were stressed out or whatever, and I admitted, and it was actually quite a big admission for me because it consumes so much of my kind of mental state, this whole addicted to food thing. So I admitted, I'm addicted to food. And they were saying, well, what does that mean? Does that mean if I've got a chocolate bar in my fridge, I've got to stand in front of it, otherwise you've got to push me out the way to eat it? And I was like, no. I'm not.
Yeah.
It's not, but I understand it sounds quite odd, doesn't it, being addicted to food? And does it sound more dramatic than it is? Well, no, I don't think so. I think it's a sincere way of putting it, isn't it?
I think people tend to, I suppose people who aren't in that world at all would picture an addiction as being something that's quite sort of more dramatic, maybe even more sort of illicit, or something that you shouldn't be doing, and there's an immediate effect, like getting drunk or getting high when you're taking drugs or whatever.
I have, though. Okay, so here, I'm going to do a bit of admission here in terms of what the behaviours I've done related to foods that I think fall in the camp of being addicted, that it's not just greed.
Yeah.
So I've taken food out of the bin to eat it. I'm really embarrassed, but I don't know, I just feel it's important to share just in case.
Sure.
I've eaten frozen bread directly from the freezer, like literally taken out a loaf of bread just to try and, if I felt tight-chested because I'm stressed out, I'm dealing with something difficult, maybe somebody is being particularly emotive, maybe a friend or family member is leaning on me and I'm finding it a struggle, I need to push down that weight that is on my chest, that tightness in my chest with food. And so actually it doesn't matter what it is. If there's something in the bin and it's not just something that's sitting on the top. If I know that there is a bit of chocolate cake left over from someone's birthday, half a foot down in a big bin, kitchen bin, so I know what else is on top of it, not that that makes it any better, I will dig it out.
Yeah.
I will go in the freezer and I will pick out a frozen piece of bread and I will eat it there and then with absolutely no satisfaction, but a desperate need to push this feeling down. I will eat food that I know I just don't like the taste of, but it's there to be able to push this feeling away. And I will sometimes get to the point where I will only feel okay if I've eaten enough that I can feel, it feels I'm so full it's coming up to my windpipe, that it's excruciatingly full to the point where it hurts, and then I can say, cool, I can cope and I can breathe because I'm full up. Because
it's having that physical sort of feedback.
That gap is no longer there. Whatever has caused that gap is no longer there. And I don't think that because I know the difference between greed. Put me in a party where they've got loads of food I like. I know what greed is. Yeah. But you kind of stop when you fill up. Whereas I don't. If I'm finding things really difficult, there is no off switch.
I think that's where I suppose people who don't really understand food addiction, it probably helped them to know that's what someone like you, and I'm sure many other people, go through, because I imagine people envisage that someone like you would always go for something that they really like the taste of, like the classic sort of reach for the cream cakes or the chocolate, but it's not that, and obviously you're not enjoying the flavour, you're not getting that sort of the immediate pleasure from it. It's just,
and I don't really eat fast food.
No, I don't. You eat quite healthily, really.
Quite healthy. We don't do takeaways.
No.
I don't. I mean, fair enough. I can, if I might go down a route of eating quite a bit of chocolate, but quite a bit for me is like 1 or 2 bars in a day. That would for me would be classed as quite a bit. No, it would normally be overeating healthy stuff as well. So it's not like, I can't remember. I think I went to McDonald's 10 years ago was the last time. I sincerely, I don't fit the criteria that most people would consider of somebody who would be overweight or would eat a lot of food to be fat or addicted to food. It would all be the sugars and the cream cakes and stuff, as you've said.
Yeah,
it's not. It's just volume of food.
Yeah, you'd actually choose to eat raw broccoli with hummus, for example.
I'd eat that all day if it meant that by eating it, I could switch off from how I was feeling.
Yeah, but it's also something that you enjoy.
Sorry.
So my point is, it isn't necessarily somebody with food addiction isn't necessarily your stereotypical can't eat anything but crisps and sweet stuff. It
greasy food
doesn't work that way. No,
greasy food.
But it's so. Do you think? Because I see the changes in the last few years. I mean, it's still an ongoing battle for you, particularly with the weight, I guess. But I've seen changes in the last few years for sure, and you've definitely got more of a handle on it. Do you think that stems from simply finding a sort of a way of eating that means you don't put on the weight, or do you think? Well, I mean, I know, but just for the benefit of everyone else, do you think you've done? How do you think you've done with getting to the root cause and actually facing it and realizing that these day-to-day problems that cause you to eat are things that you can handle, you can manage?
Yeah, there's a general mindset approach, which I think makes a difference, and I'll come back to that. I do have to admit, I don't see this ever properly going away.
No.
I think it's so ingrained that even when I'm 100, if I'm having a crappy day, I think I will lean on food because I don't really drink or smoke or anything else. I think once you have a vice or whatever you want to call it, that's the thing that makes you feel better or helps you cope, whatever it might be. And I am sincerely impressed with people like you when it's something that's productive, like music for you, or maybe someone else it's yoga, or someone else it's going for a walk, whatever it is. Yeah. Huge hats off, and that's brilliant. So I think for me, as soon as I identified the root conviction of not feeling good enough, I had to unravel that a bit. And I found a book. No, I was recommended a book from a CBT practitioner I was working with called The Guide to Self-Compassion or something. And it's a workbook. It's quite thick. It was quite helpful. And I was reading through it, and I don't remember when the moment came, but I realised I care about myself.
Yeah.
So that sentence, I care about myself, didn't necessarily replace the not feeling good enough, because you can actually have them in parallel. They don't supersede one or the other. So it was accessible to me to have this positive phrase of I care about myself, because I do now. Maybe there was a time when I was younger that I don't, but I can't address that now. It doesn't make any difference. So I started feeling I care about myself, and then looking at my approach to food and nutrition, and I care about myself not to be as big as I can get, or I care about myself and would rather ask for a hug than go and have the food. Because I think I also read it once, and I wish I could remember this when I'm having a really difficult day. Nothing is ever helpful if it makes you feel remorseful afterwards. So food is never going to help me if I inevitably feel crappy at the end of the day when I look back and go, oh, look at all that food I ate.
Yeah.
So I think the turning point for me was the starting to say to myself, I care about myself, and looking for ways to show myself that I care about myself. And I mean, even now, you know, after the beginning of this year and gaining that weight, I needed to get it back in control. And the problem with food addiction is that you can't not eat. With somebody who struggles with alcoholism or drugs or smoking, you know, there are ways you can just cut it out. You can go to rehab. You can say, right, that's it. I'm not going to drink this alcohol anymore. You can have varying drugs or vapes or whatever it might be to help you. With food, you always have to eat. And you give someone who's having a really shitty day, who struggles with food, their lunch, they might end up carrying on eating.
Yeah.
So you can't get away from it, which is why I had to choose to go down the very low calorie diet a couple of months ago to try and switch off the need to eat, because meal replacement, so for me it's Lighter Life at the moment. I'm sure there are other diets available. But by doing Lighter Life, I was able to not have to focus on food. I'm quite a compliant child actually. I'm only allowed 4 packs a day. And compliant child, by the way, is a psychology thing. I don't see myself as a kid. But you're only allowed 4 packs a day and you're not allowed any other food if that's the way you want to go about it. So I was able to just cut food out. What I need to continue working on, because I've been, you know, you've seen me on days where I'm feeling a bit stressed out. Maybe there's quite a lot I'm doing. Even this morning, for example, I'm quite hasty and I get a bit stressy, and you're having to say like, Beck, chill out, go and have a couple of minutes, you know, because we don't obviously want our girls to pick up on it and be affected by, say, my stress. And I can't go off and eat something to calm myself down. But those times over the last couple of months, for example, have got a bit less. Either they're happening less often, or they don't last for as long, or I'm not having the sugar or whatever, eating something, and then later on having the rebound and feeling crappy about it.
Well, it's a process of learning. I mean, it sounds daft, but learning what you would do when sort of unhindered by food, and without having that constant sort of cushion to sort of help break your fall.
Yeah, and that's what I'm doing right now. Yeah. And I did it 10 years ago, and it was quite good 10 years ago, and I stuck with it for quite a while in terms of being at a good weight, but then we had to go through IVF, and 5 rounds of it really wasn't that helpful for someone.
No.
And inevitably food crept back in, and then the girls were born 3 months early, and I was back to working after 6 days and seeing them in the hospital and having that horrendous roller coaster. Again, I still don't understand how you didn't fall into drink, but how did you manage it? But I gained weight, and so you know, I just slapped my hand on my leg. But yeah, that's what can happen. So it is an ongoing journey. I am not fixed, but I do recognise that if I care about myself, sometimes just saying that to myself at the point where I feel that hunger, even if it's pseudo hunger, I can try and stop the connection to I feel this way, therefore I need to eat, with I feel this way, what can I do about it?
Exactly, and reminding yourself that you can cope with things that sometimes feel like they're impossible to cope with, because I mean we all do it. You have these thoughts, and they can gather in your mind, and it can feel like they're insurmountable, or that they feel it feels visceral, like they're actually slowing you down, impinging, making you feel panicky, all those things. But it's I think, for you anyway, it's over time getting used to the fact that, okay, they feel a certain way. These feelings are particularly strong, especially because you're not used to experiencing them and seeing it through without interrupting it with the food. But it's about kind of getting over that initial hump and realizing, okay, this feeling of anxiety, whatever it might be, does diminish if I give it long enough. And I think that's probably the key.
I'm learning that.
Yeah.
Learning.
Yeah. Well, and as you say, it's a lifelong thing, and you will always lean on food to some extent. It's just reducing that, you know, how often you're sort of needing to be dependent on it and lean on it. And I think it's doable. I mean, you seem to be doing well with it now, and it'll be interesting to see, you know, over the next few months.
Indeed. Food's coming back in. Yeah. What am I going to do? Yeah. Exactly. And it really, the whole thing with Lighter Life, yes, it's nice to have lost some weight, But that wasn't it was actually more just removing the thing so that I could focus on how I was feeling more.
Yep.
But yeah, so there we have it. That's one of my driving behaviours for not feeling good enough. I have more, you lucky people, that we can share in future episodes. But Maz is also going to be talking through some of his driving behaviours in future episodes related to not belonging. If any of this has struck a chord, we'd be delighted to hear from you. So whether, as we said, it's you that feels you might suffer from an addiction or somebody else who struggles, we'd love to hear from you. Anything that you'd like us to kind of discuss and work out with you, that you share your thoughts, put the comments underneath the podcast, or get in touch with us, however, which way. We've probably got our contact details somewhere on the website, but regardless, we think. Sorry if I'm promising anything that we haven't got. Can't think about it now. We'll be a bit more
professional somewhere down the line.
I'm sure you can do a comment anyway.
Yeah.
But we'd be delighted to hear what you think. And for now, if you're still with us right now and you've listened all the way to the end, thank you so much. Your ears are loved for giving us this attention, and we hope that you join us again in a future episode. You take care.
Bye-bye.